until 11, over after 11. All right, good morning. My name's Gary Matsuoka, and we're here at Laguna Hills Nursery in Santa Ana. It's Saturday morning, and we've got another question and answer session today. If you're listening live, you can actually send us some questions during the class, and we can get them. Okay, open for questions in the audience right now.
I have a... We're going to pass the microphone over, so when you have a question, just ask. Sorry. Just hold the microphone close to you.
I actually have a picture on my phone that I took of my plum tree.
Mm-hmm.
And this past year, we didn't have one plum on the tree. I had the tree cut the year prior by the gentleman that you suggested. And now this year it's starting to ooze.
Yeah, oozing sap is not a great sign. How's the foliage on it? Leaves look okay?
The foliage was fine.
Well, then it's probably not. So all stone fruit trees, including plums, can leak sap. If the sap doesn't smell and the wood's not stained right around it, it's probably not a bad sign, because it's called gummosis when they leak sap. But trees can leak sap during a heat wave, a cold snap, heavy rain event, heavy irrigation event, from physical damage. But you know, I've had gobs of sap come out of a plum tree like the size of a golf ball. Nothing ever happened as a result. Now, the other problem with plums is no one's gotten much fruit in the last 12 years. Last year was cool enough, but generally with plum trees and most stone fruits, you need 2 good winters in a row with enough chill to get a good crop, because one chill gets them growing so they can develop the budwood, and the next chill, the second year chill, then gets all the budwood to then flower properly and fruit. But we only had, say, one chilly year at all in the last 12 years that sufficient enough for a lot of plums. I mean, some plums produced this year. We had some really low chill plums like Satsuma, and we imagine beauty plums did well. But if you have a Santa Rosa, it hasn't been cold enough for that except for last year, and maybe since 2006. But so it hasn't been good for plums at all lately. Haven't seen much crop. So if the leaves look good, the tree's fairly healthy. If you got some decent growth this year, hopefully we'll have a cool winter, and then you'll get a crop. I mean, it's supposed to be a La Nina winter this coming year, which usually means cooler temperatures. Like last winter was El Nino, which means hot winter or warm winter. We just didn't get anything close to frost last year, or last winter.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a
Yes.
foxglove plant that is huge and is doing really well, but it doesn't bloom. Will it still bloom?
Oh yeah, foxgloves. So there's several kinds of foxgloves. A lot of the ones that are considered true perennials don't bloom the first year you have them. They take a while to get going. There's the one called foxy foxglove, which blooms usually for everybody immediately, but it's an annual. It dies after it blooms. So it sounds like you have one of the more perennial ones, unless you've had it for more than a couple of years already.
Okay, it's been in the ground about a year.
Okay, so you're still good
Still might
shape.
bloom.
Yeah, this year everything's running well behind normal. So, you know, it's interesting. According to the chill calculator in Irvine, the coolest day this last winter was April 5th. So winter was April, and then we got spring around June. You know, everything's been delayed this year. So you still have a chance later on this year to get flowers, but
Okay.
next year you should.
Okay. I have another question about roses.
Mm-hmm.
How can you tell when a rose bush isn't going to survive?
Well,
I had
if
that
all-
disease on it, and I've treated it, and trimmed it back. And then we had the hot spell. I don't know how to tell if they're
Well, if it's still got green leaves, you're okay. I mean, the one fatal disease we see running around is some kind of cane canker or stem canker where all the branches just turn black and
Okay.
it kills the plant. But if you're just getting messed up leaves, right now, we're in the middle of chili thrip season, which are little bugs that shrivel all the new growth. So all the buds, all the new leaves just
Mhm.
shrivel up. There's treatments for that.
Okay.
So if that's what you have, we can
That's what I
treat
think
for
I
that.
have.
But for the last month or so, the chili thrips have been really nasty. So at the nursery, we spray for thrips pretty much every week,
Okay. With
just
that
to make
Captain
sure we don't get
Jack's.
Captain Jack. Well, okay, Captain Jack's and a wetting agent, or else get the spinosad soap.
Okay.
So, because Captain Jack's won't stick to your new growth on your roses, so we do, it's Captain Jack's a spinosad, and this spinosad soap already has soap added, so it sticks better.
Okay.
So this will work. What we did all spring and summer is alternated this with this.
Okay.
The
I have that one.
all seasons oil,
Hmm.
and if you want to treat it for mildew, you add baking soda to this. And then this one on alternate weeks, we just did that all spring and summer and didn't see any evidence of thrips at all. But the thrips, especially the new chili thrip, is really bad news. It gets on quite a few plants that are growing.
It started on a couple, and now I've got it on almost all of them.
Yeah, it's only been around in our area for about 6 or 7 years, but it's really nasty when it hits.
Okay.
Last year wasn't so bad because it was very cool. Chili thrips like it hot. And this year we had actually some heat. 2 years ago we had heat too. So,
But if the stems aren't producing any green, then they're done.
well, if they're not shriveled up, they're still alive.
Okay. And then I go ahead and treat it with that.
Right. I
Okay.
mean, roses are pretty resilient, so it's really hard to kill a rose unless you have that black, the disease that makes the stems turn black.
Are you treating only roses with that free formula, or do you treat everything?
We do quite a few. Well, there's a lot of plants in nursery that that this helps besides roses. So we usually treat a lot of the vegetables and certain bedding plants with it that we know get similar bugs and or diseases. So just a good one for us to use here because both of these are considered organic treatments.
When you're using those, how do you get the baking soda into? You said add baking soda.
Well, with these, you can take the top off and add.
So you just put it in it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got elevated garden beds that I do my gardening in, and I'm just curious, what are some good techniques for winterizing those? I mean, I generally pull the plant out and the roots. The soil is mostly Gary's soil, and I've been putting a layer of compost on, and then just kind of letting it sit over the winter.
No, we like to keep things growing in it. I mean, there's plenty of crops. If you're back east, yeah, most of the winter time you can't grow anything. It's too cold. Here, it's perfect for growing all our winter crops: onions, potatoes, all the leaf crops. I mean, you want to keep using it. So, grow a crop that's not related to what you want to do in the summer. So we have to rotate properly. A lot of farms that put in a winter crop or don't do crops in the winter will just plant, clover or some kind of legume there that'll help. Those actually create fertilizer or nitrogen in the ground. So I see a little community plot over here that does corn and beans in the summer, and then they actually do fava beans in the winter, which is a winter crop, and coriander. So
I one of the problems I have is that the sun, I lose the sun on that side of the house for a couple of months, just because it's shaded. But will some of these plants still do okay in a?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, north side of my house, we still do lettuce and cauliflower, broccoli. A lot of things will grow in a lot of shade.
So the purpose of keeping plants in there is for what reason, rather than letting the soil just rest?
There's no such thing as soil resting. I mean, all it is you want to keep planting things unrelated to what you just planted so that the prevalence of disease never gets too strong on one item that you had planted.
Okay. All right.
So
Yeah, so why not leave it idle? What's the negative side of leaving it idle?
nothing. Well, I guess there's nothing really. You just get a lot of weeds coming up. That's all. So if you'd rather have something other than weeds, spinach, lettuce, those are awful good ones to plant.
Okay.
Got a couple samples for you.
Okay.
The pear, I'm not sure. I wasn't real good about spraying, but somehow I'm having trouble timing spraying right. So, but yeah, frass was coming out and everything as it laid on the counter.
Yes, so this pear has codling moths.
Okay.
Yeah, they're little caterpillars. The moth comes and lays eggs on the plant, and then they bore in. Well, the most important thing on codling moths is don't let the fruit touch anything. So the codling moth has to hide its eggs. So the eggs sit on the outside of the fruit for several days before they hatch. And generally there are predators walking around looking for eggs to eat. So codling moths usually hide their eggs either where two pears touch each other or where the pear touches a leaf or a branch. So you have to make sure that the pears are hanging singly, not touching anything.
I netted them. Would that be considered?
Yeah, if you net the pears, the bugs can't get to them. Now you've got to net them early. I believe they said size of a golf ball is when the codling moths can start attacking. So you've got to do it when it's pretty young.
Okay. Anything else on there? It looked like something had been kind of chewing on the sides, or yeah, it's a young tree. This is first year it produced.
Well, codling moth is the main one we always are messed up with because they'll drill right through, and most of the other problems aren't going to affect the crop or the flesh that much. I mean, the other way they do it is you spray spinosad on them every 2 weeks from the time they're golf ball size, but that's a pain too.
Yeah, coming. Okay, the leaves are a chameleon.
Okay, so this is a common problem on camellias. I don't know if we can show this on the camera well, but this is aerified mites, so camellia mites. They're microscopic, so these may or may not be covered with mites. I mean, that could be a sunburn too. I'd have to get a loop out. Let me grab my loop 1 second.
Did you just notice that on there?
I had it once before, a long time ago.
Sunburn after last week, a lot of our.
Yeah, no, and it's 4 bushes, but only one of them has it. And I'd sprayed years ago for something. Somebody told me to spray, and it went away. But it's back on only 1 bush. Yeah, but you're right. It's the tall one that could be in the sun too.
Okay, let's check this out. It's got some scale and there's some eggs on here. So this is actually, yeah, there's eggs on it along the center vein. So this would be a mite problem. So the oil sprays are generally what we would use. And do them at least 2 treatments because oils don't kill eggs. So you've got to, you spray it to kill all the adults, and then you spray it again a week later to catch anything that hatched out of eggs during that time.
Okay.
And then these guys can also mess up the flowers in the winter and spring. They they get inside the buds and cause them to turn brown on all the edges.
My question revolves around watering with your soil. I'm transitioning everything slowly over to the Gary's Top Pot, and I hear a lot that you can overwater rosemary, you can overwater hot peppers. What's your take on how often those should be watered? Can you water every day with your stuff? Because I'm experiencing my rosemary with browning branches just kind of dying off, and from what I was able to kind of research, that's a sign of overwatering.
Right. No such thing as overwatering. So we've had to come to the conclusion that that term was invented to cover the rotting that compost causes on the roots. So before 1980, we just watered every day, everything every day. And in the mid 80s, they started changing our containers mixed soils to compost from real dirt. So real dirt, my dad planted all his plants in something that looked like this back in the 60s. And then slowly we started transition, they wanted to make this lighter because real dirt is 100 pounds per cubic foot. And a lot of the plants, we had 1 gallon plants and 5 gallon plants. There were no 15 gallon plants because 15 gallon bucket filled with this is like 300 pounds. Or at least 200 pounds. So they wanted to make the stuff lighter. So they told us the original formula was sand and peat moss, which would work because peat moss is dead so long it doesn't cause any rotting reactions. But peat moss has always been expensive, and the nursery industry settled on 1/3 bark, 1/3 peat, and 1/3 sand, which wasn't too bad. It was only 1/3, but over the decades, what happened was they found out that when you grow plants in containers, pure ground up bark grows plants the quicker, because the less dense the soil is, the more freely air and water can flow through. That's why hydroponics is around, because you have very airy conditions with lots of water and things grow like a weed. Well, in ground up bark, when bark is fresh, it is very airy, hardly holds any water. And as it ages, as it decomposes, it starts holding more water, and the plant's growing at the same time, getting bigger, using more water. So it works really well for the couple months it takes the nurseries to grow the plant in it. But once you get to about 5, 6, 7 months, the bark is now no longer breathing at all, and it's still rotting, and it starts taking out the roots of your plant, and you get root rot. And it's not the water, it's the fact that the plant's trying to grow in a compost pile. And there's very few plants that are successful in compost piles, tomatoes being the main one. So tomatoes don't seem to be bothered as much by growing in compost. And most potting soil companies test how good their potting soil is by growing tomatoes in it, because that's the only thing that will grow in it for a long time. So what can we do? Everything's been growing in the wrong material. Now, if you put in our top pot, you've got to get rid of the compost that's on the plant, or at least lessen it a little bit, take some of it off. You can take half the dirt off of any root ball without affecting it, and that may be sufficient enough to keep it from rotting. Because our top pot, you can set it in a bucket of water, it shouldn't rot the plant. I mean, at least in a tray of water, we've done that for decades, put plants in our top pot in trays of water and just let them sit there with an inch of water at the bottom, nothing happens. So it's not the watering that really causes the rotting, it's the fact that the plant had compost on it. And they'll just tell you overwatering so they have an excuse why their plants are dying.
Yeah.
But if we start them in our soil, they never rot. We just don't see it.
And you water everything every day through summer, even like?
Pretty much, yeah. And we've had to do it twice a day the last week because we're over 100 degrees. Anytime you get close to 100, you got to keep watering.
Yeah.
Just keep watering.
And when you said that you can remove a lot of the dirt and compost, I just bought a citrus tree actually did that exact thing based on one of your videos. Took a water stream to it. Didn't get all the way in just because of how dense it was, but are there any complications I can expect in the coming days? I only did this 2 days ago. Like what's transplant shock? You always hear about that as well. Is that-
Right. So that if you do that, anything to the roots are compromised for about 2 weeks. Takes them 2 weeks to totally recover. Now, if the weather stays like this for 2 weeks, you got no problems. But generally, what we like to do is shade them for half the day for the next 2 weeks.
Okay.
So if it's 80 degrees or more and it's sunny, they're going to be using a lot of water, and if they don't have the root system, they'll shed their leaves. Now I did that, so I had a grapefruit tree. This was like 20 years ago, 25 years ago. I took all the soil off, put in the ground because it was overcast. It was middle of May. I thought May gray for the next month, no problem. Put in the ground, and 2 days later it got 85 degrees and sunny, and the tree just shed all its leaves. But shedding is something that the plant does actively to save itself. So if it sheds, no problem. So in a month later, it grew all the leaves back and was fine. If it doesn't have time to shed its leaves and the leaves hang there brown, it's dead.
Okay.
But if it's shedding its leaves, that's the plant saving itself, cutting down its water usage until it's ready to grow new leaves again. So. But yeah, shading it for half the day. You can put something tall next to it. What we've done is took our empty potting soil bags, put stakes near them, a couple stakes, strung the bag on it, put it on two sides of the plant. So only got sun midday and not morning and afternoon. That worked quite well too. Or put a little canopy over it so the sun can sneak in morning and afternoon and not midday, something like that. So.
I have more questions if no one else has any. You have some more?
Go ahead.
When do you start fertilizing young plants? So I'm into dragon fruit cuttings, trying to do some fig cuttings, things like that. And I know that they're going to be very, very new, small root systems. When would you recommend starting to fertilize something like that? And how would you do it?
Well, immediately. In nature, there's never a lack of nutrition around. It's always there. So nature, the main source of nutrition is just dead leaves on top of the ground. And generally, if the plant's going to grow in an area that's going to be they claim, and the average in the world is 5 inches of dead leaves are sitting there decomposing, and that's your nutrition source. So it's always there. So we need it immediately, or else your plant really turns pale. So we like to get the fertilizer on immediately. I mean, don't overdo it.
Yeah.
But do something, because they're expecting to have that available to them, so that they can grow roots, they can grow everything else. So, okay, any other questions from the audience?
We were talking about the pear situation. I have a August peach, and it produced quite a bit, but 95% of them got bugs in the sides of them. So it was just like the picture that I showed you from the plum branches. So I was just wondering, and I had sprayed with the copper and the two other.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. So I started growing peaches in the 80s. In the 80s, we didn't have any bug problems on peaches because there weren't many peaches grown in Southern California up until the mid 80s. And after that, there's two pests that go into the fruit. So one's called a peach twig borer, and the other one's called a oriental fruit moth. Very similar insects. Peach twig borer goes in through the side of the peach, so you know it's there. Oriental fruit moth goes right through the stem into the pit area, and you don't know it's there until you take a bite. But they both do the same thing. So they're both little tiny moths and little caterpillars. Both of them have 4 generations a year that drill the stem tips, so you get the gummy tips on your peaches that leak sap, and you get the little brown tip leaves. But the third generation in each one of these, the middle generation of the year, goes right into the fruit. So we get it on peaches that ripen June, July, and August. We don't see it on peaches that ripen earlier, and peaches really don't ripen later than August. So that's what we're getting, and we treat them with the spinosad, either spinosad Captain Jack's, spinosad soap. There's several brands of products that make something with spinosad in them, which is organic. Spinosad is a chemical found apparently in rum, and it will control these critters quite well. Now, the first generation is right when they bloom, so they often recommend spraying the trees right when they're blooming. Don't spray them when the bees are on them, so you spray them either really early or really late in the evening. Once this dries off, it won't hurt the bees. It only hurts the bees if you spray the bee. And you'll get that first generation, and sometimes that's good enough. We get that first generation. If your neighbors don't have peaches and nectarine trees around, then you may not get any infestation at all that year. But if you do have neighbors that have trees and they're not treating them, then you may have to do this every couple of weeks all year. So.
And you spray that directly on the fruit then?
Yeah.
Yeah, I sprayed the Captain Jack twice during the fruiting. And prior to that, I did I think it was the copper, the Captain Jack's, and there were 3 sprays that I sprayed, and I still got same as the year before, except I think I had the oriental fruit moth because it was going through the stem 2 years ago. This year it was the
Peach twig borer.
side, yeah.
No, be persistent.
I know I have trouble getting the spraying right. So once you start spraying like the apple tree, it just keeps blooming for weeks and weeks and weeks. What do you do? Just keep spraying?
Well, spray every 2 weeks. I mean, we spray a lot of our plants every 2 weeks here. Okay. And we had a lot of the oriental fruit moth showing up on our peaches and nectarines this year. So we had to spray them. Usually one good spray can stop it here, but this year we had to spray them at least 3 times this summer, and they're still around.
Okay.
So. You
have your traps to monitor for like coddling moth, was it, or whatever? Do you just start spraying the blossoms when they're there, or is it good to use one of those and see?
Well, no, on both of these, they're interesting in that they don't overwinter as moths or eggs or pupa. They actually overwinter on your tree as a caterpillar in the branch. So in the wintertime, you look at your stems of your peaches and nectarines, and if it's bulbous on the very tip of the stem and it's leaking, it's kind of leaking sap there's a caterpillar in there. And they wake up when the sap flows when they're blooming. And so the first thing the caterpillars do is they get out of this they call it a hibernarium, and eat the flower petals. So you're not really stopping the moths. You're actually stopping the caterpillars that are just coming out of hibernation. It's the weirdest thing. They said they don't know of any other moth caterpillar that has that cycle where they overwinter as a caterpillar in each branch. Sometimes they're not at the end. Sometimes they're at where the leaves were attached at a node, and you can see the sap leaking there, and it's swollen. So, you can go around your tree in the winter and cut off all the tips that are swollen, anything else where there's sap flow, and you'll control that. But again, if your neighbor has peaches and nectarines and they don't do it, then you will have to be treating.
Okay. The apple is what I'm having trouble with blooming all the time. So it's
Well, in the apple, yeah, that would make sense. The codling moths do overwinter as, I believe, pupa. And they said they usually live in the rough bark, pupate in the rough bark of the tree. They do make these, they said if you put cardboard around your trunk, tape cardboard, then they often climb into the cardboard to pupate, and you just take them off and throw them in the trash. But I don't know. You probably just have to spray them every year or cover them.
Okay. Yeah. I have a lot of your Freedom blackberries. Okay, and of course, there are hundreds of fruit on it right now. But the sun burnt a lot of them, and then the green beetles are eating like crazy. So I picked probably 100 green beetles off this week. Is there a good way to treat them other than me going around picking them off?
Well, we mentioned last week the trap that people are making that works.
The bottle where you invert it.
Right.
Yeah, they didn't go for it this year. They did last year.
Huh.
Yeah, I think the fruit was just too tempting.
Because there's no pesticide that'll kill those.
Okay. Yeah.
Now it's just so you know, there are what are called what are they called? Berry maggots. So they came from Asia about 20 years ago, and they're pretty much widespread throughout the United States now. So if you look really carefully at any blackberry you pick, there's maggots in it. If you don't look, what we just started doing is don't look. But so you can probably, if you want, spray them with this every week or two, or whatever it says on there, to keep the maggot population as low as you can. Because that's one of the reasons that so when you have maggots, they said the berries don't ripen evenly. There'll be some red ones along with some black ones, and then the maggots are in there.
How about white kernels?
Yeah, that probably too. So anytime you have discolored berries, usually that's due to the maggots. So it's a nasty little critter that everybody, you can't do much about. I guess you can cover the entire plant with this mesh stuff.
Yeah. I
But
got rows of them. So what do I put over them for sunburn next time? I put a towel and they burnt just the same.
Well, that's why a lot of berry growers are in the plastic hoop tunnels. But so I'm not sure how much shade that creates. It might be 20-30% shade.
Shade cloth work, or does it keep too much heat in? They fried.
Yeah, well, when it's 105, you can't do much. You really can't do much. It's just too hot for them. That's why most berry farmers right on the coast, Central California coast, Oregon coast.
So I've got cherry trees and peach trees. I'm in Northern California, Central Valley. And I have a problem with borers on both of those trees. In the last couple of years, I've had a problem on the cherries, which are still fairly young, where the top of the twig, it almost looks like a fire blight thing, but I'm not sure that it's fire blight. So the borers get pretty bad after a few years. So I'm replacing my fruit trees probably every 8-10 years.
Yeah, I'm not sure if there's a good control for borers. Now, most textbooks will tell you if it's adequately watered, then the borers can't get in, but they can get in through any area that's been pruned or damaged too, which is the problem. But it's hard to treat for borers because they're inside the wood and there's no pesticides that get in there real well. They usually talk about sticking wire in there and spearing the darn things to get them out of there. I don't really have a good answer other than keep the tree well watered. I mean, you can't do anything when there's a drought. During the drought, all these borers get into fruit trees when they're not allowed to water enough.
Well, I have my own well. I'm still careful about my water, but I've been replacing the trees that were just dying with avocado trees. So now all the fruit trees are getting more water than they used to because they do water the avocados regularly.
Now, last year when it rained all the way into May, Dave Wilson Nursery, our fruit tree supplier, mentioned that they had seen a huge number of bacterial cankers all throughout Central California on apricots and cherries. They said those two were affected the most. Peaches, plums all got some of that too, but that was just from the excessive rain, where they were just leaking sap and dying.
I lost a cherry last year after the rain stuff. But the tips on At first, I thought it was fire blight, but I'm not sure. I don't know if is there a brown rot or some kind of rot thing that
Well, we
cherries
haven't
get?
heard of fire blight on stone fruit. It's usually on apples and pears.
Yeah, I can't grow apples and pears. You get fire blight really easy. I've lost apples to that.
Mhm.
I don't even try pears.
But on stone fruit, last year was that thing, the bacterial bleeding cankers. There's also some diseases that are hard to diagnose. I mean, this would happen about 15 years ago in my yard, where all our peach trees would bloom in the spring real nicely, set fruit, start growing leaves, and all those branches would then just slowly shrivel. The peaches wouldn't develop, but the plant from its trunk would grow entirely new branches that looked totally healthy. And we didn't know what was going on. And the next year it did the same thing off the new branches that had replaced the dead ones. They did the same thing. They bloomed, set fruit, made leaves, shriveled up, and the tree. So we finally determined that was some kind of bacterial infection that was being spread by the glasswing sharpshooters or something. It could have been our pruners. It could have been the sharpshooters. They say it does happen in the Central Valley a lot, and they have to clean their pruners between trees, sterilize their pruning tools between trees, because it transfers that way too, where it just cuts off the circulation. Where the disease enters the tree, it cuts off the circulation. The problem we're having is that glasswing sharpshooter that came in from Texas is big enough that it can suck through the trunks of a lot of plants. So it can take out some really big branches. It didn't take out the entire tree, didn't get the trunk that was that big on my peaches, but it took out all the small ones. And did that year after year, so we just cut down the trees. Now the sharpshooter is under biological control as of around 2005 or 2000. Well, between 2005 and 2010, they released predators that eat the eggs of these sharpshooters, so they're not nearly as numerous as they were back around 2000. So we haven't seen it pop up again, but that can certainly happen. That bacterial infection that just cuts off the circulation.
Yeah, there are one tree's got a couple of branches on one side that just kind of shriveled up this year. So, if it looks like it's some infection and it keeps going, is it best just to replace the tree?
Yeah. And then you have to worry about, replant syndrome. You can't plant the same thing in the same dirt twice.
Right.
So
an avocado would go in there, and I opened up a new area for stone fruit. Okay, thank you.
I was watching one of your videos on fertilizer, and you mentioned that after you use a general fertilizer to get all three of the main ingredients in them into the soil, that you really only need to start supplementing with nitrogen only. Is that true for potted plants as well? I would assume a lot would wash out, or does the phosphorus and the potassium stay in potted plants well?
in our soil, the phosphorus potassium might stay a little better than most potting soils, just because we got the charcoal in there. The charcoal does help, but I would tell you, generally in containers, everything flushes through. So because our soil is so coarse, like in the ground, which is real fine textured, a lot of things just stick to all the soil particles real well, especially the clay particles really well, and they don't move. So generally, what we've been told in the soil, nitrogen is really the only thing that's moving a lot. And once you get the other minerals in there, and there are 13 you need to apply, most of those they'll be there in adequate amounts for a long time, although they still move. So like we've heard that potassium moves about a 1/4 inch a year. So they say usually in 20 years you may have to reapply potassium. In our native soil, phosphorus is in huge amounts, so we don't usually ever have to apply phosphorus to the ground in Orange County. And a lot of the minerals are needed in such small quantities that we just don't have to apply them in the ground. Cobalt, nickel, molybdenum. I mean, it's like they may only be needed an ounce per acre. You know? So such small quantities needed that you don't have to worry about it. So nitrogen is the main thing in the ground and in pots. Nitrogen is the main thing we have to replace. But in pots, it's safe to replace all of them.
Okay. And is nitrogen the only chemical that will cause root burn, or was it?
Oh no, anything in salt form. I mean, organically, if you use organic fertilizers, they don't burn anything.
Okay.
It's really hard to burn with organic, but with chemical fertilizers, yeah, any of the minerals applied in excess can cause trouble. I mean, I still flinch when I see people recommending you put Epsom salts on roses. It's like, that's a micronutrient. It's like a pinch would probably treat your whole rose garden. And you're putting all the wrong material on there. I mean, it's magnesium sulfate. Magnesium is a micronutrient. It's not a major nutrient. You just don't need that much. And if you overdo it, they say you block potassium uptake, which is a major nutrient. So, yeah, so you have to be careful with chemicals.
On another subject, are there, as far as chill hours, I have a burgundy plum at home as well, and I live in Marietta Valley, so I'm hoping that we're going to get cold enough hours to produce a pretty good crop next year or the year after.
How'd you do this year?
Well, it was a brand new plant.
Okay.
So who knows where it was imported from, all those details. But would leaving that in a pot, you said that potted plants can get more, like the air chill will affect certain plants more. Would a plum in a potted raised plant, or a raised pot, do better than in the soil if you're kind of right on the cusp of the chill hours?
Well, it's really, you have to chill the branch itself. So when you keep planting a pot, the soil, the roots get colder than they would in the ground, but it doesn't affect the chill that they get on top. However, if you keep it in a pot, you can move the tree to the chilliest spot of your yard. Okay. In fact, you can lay it down because the air is colder near the ground than it is up high. So if you lay your plum tree down in a cold, shady corner, you'll get more chill than if you have it stood up.
Okay, so chill hours are for the above soil, not
right.
The roots at all.
Each flower bud has to get its chill. So when we have mild winters, the bottom of the tree flowers the best and fruits the heaviest because it's colder down lower than it is up high. But on the years when we get more than adequate chill, the tops of the trees always make the most fruit because they got the most sunlight the year before. So it's real interesting to see that. Like at my house in the 90s when we had adequate chill, it was the tops of my apricots that were just loaded. But on the years when we had inadequate chill, only the bottom branch would fruit because that was closer to the ground where it's colder. So,
on one other note, I have a little questions for you, Gary. Any advice for repelling hawk moths and like the tomato green caterpillar, the horned caterpillar? I've had a lot of issues with both tomatoes and my hot peppers from those caterpillars. So that'll work on those as well.
Once a month application.
Okay.
I mean, this lasts only 2 weeks, but a hawk moth takes 2 weeks to go from an egg to something that can eat a branch. The first 2 weeks of her life, it's only this big. It doesn't do hardly any damage, but the next 2, it can eat the entire plant. So you want to catch it at least every month before it gets up to size. But at our house, we spray it once a month. We don't see anything. So.
A follow-up question on the fruit trees. If I take out a tree because I think it has bacteria or whatever, how far away should I plant a stone fruit if I'm going to do that?
Oh, I'd go at least 15 foot from the trunk.
So if I'm 40 or 50 feet out.
I don't see there's a problem with that. Yeah.
Okay. And then because I'm in the Central Valley near Sacramento, we had a lot of heat, and my avocado trees are mostly young and they came through with cover and all that and mulch. So I'm hearing kind of conflicting things. I have like some salvias and low bushes that don't have a lot of roots going on next to them, kind of to help shade stuff in the summer. Will they also protect from cold, or do I need to trim them? Because I've got a microclimate that tends to get a little bit colder, so the winter is going to be the challenge for me for the trees.
Well, according to agriculture research, in order to make it warmer around the tree, you need to have bare dirt.
So my 4 inches of compost that
No,
they're happily
well,
growing feeder roots in needs to.
Well, compost keeps the ground cooler, whereas
Right.
bare dirt warms up by the winter sun, will warm the soil up.
Right.
I don't know if it's, I don't know how much difference it makes, but that's what they tell the orchards, citrus orchards, to keep your fruit, your fruit from freezing, have bare dirt in the wintertime.
Yeah.
So
So are they moving compost or doing anything different in the summer?
well, they've also
Mulch.
told the orchards, yeah, if you get your orchard covered, the ground covered with either ground covers in the summer or with compost 3 inches deep, then it keeps the soil a lot cooler in the summer. So,
Okay, so this sounds like it's going to be a science experiment in the backyard.
yeah. I mean, covering the ground with clear plastic will certainly heat things up no matter what you do. Clear plastic in the wintertime, it gets hot underneath. Clear black, not so hot, but clear plastic really heats up the ground.
Really? So my problem is I'm going to be gone for almost a month, late October to almost late November, and we can have frost November 1st.
Right.
So I have Christmas lights, the old style, that I'm going to put out and just put on timers and just run them every night because nobody's babysitting my trees. But
Yeah, I mean, in Florida, they said for a while they were using halogen lights because those
Mhm.
things really transmit the heat. They said they got that idea because one winter it was so icy, and the workers all parked their cars and left their engines running, so they went, with their lights on, and they said 100 feet away from the trees, all the ice was melting on those trees from
Yeah.
the heat from the halogen headlights.
Were they citrus?
Yeah, which is interesting. It can transmit the heat 100 foot just from the light alone. Of course, the neighbors probably wouldn't like that if you had lights on at night.
My neighbors have lights on all night, unfortunately, so I wish they wouldn't. The other issue is it's when it gets that cold, often it's a north wind, and so
Mm.
any other than even probably lights, the wind is blowing that heat away from
Yeah.
the tree. So we can have fog and frost, we can have clear sky and frost. It can get pretty cold.
Yeah, it's gonna be hard to deal with. That's
Okay,
hard
I
to
was
deal
hoping
with.
there was something magic that would help.
Well, there's a guy who near Fresno, he built an underground city. I don't know if you heard of him.
Underground gardens.
Yeah,
I have taken.
it's 50 feet below ground level. It's warm.
Well, and it's cool in the summer too.
Yeah.
I have taken those plastic round compost things for the backyard
Mm-hmm.
and filled them up and stuck them next to citrus, kind of surrounded citrus with those just to. And
Yeah.
thrown a cover over the top when they were young, just
That
to
can-
get a couple extra degrees.
Right. That can do something. Yeah.
Okay, it's going to be a creative year.
So just to review for peaches. So I understand for the leaf curl, you need to spray before any kind of a blossom even shows up. That's
Well, they said so according to the research, the most effective spraying with the copper would be right when there's bud color.
okay.
That's the most effective. But if you wait till the flowers are open, it's too late. So right when they're starting to show bud color is the most. But everybody wants to get in at least one spraying before that, because if it's raining when that happens, you can't do the spraying.
Okay.
So they say in the Central Valley though, because they can't allow any peach leaf curl to show up because it can ruin the crop. That they spray every 5 inches of rain.
Okay. So prior to that, I can look for branches that may have this larva in the end of it and trim that off.
Right.
Then I would go to this next step would be to get the buds right as they're, and then the next step would be using the product. Is it Senegal? Is that what you're calling it?
Spinosad.
Spinos, and put that on the actual flower,
Right.
right? And then maybe when the fruit starts to come around, go ahead and spray the fruit with the same product.
Well, the main thing is you watch your foliage in the springtime. So if the moths are there, you'll still get the damage on the ends of the branches where they're still. So the second generation drills all the new growth tips, and you'll see brown leaves at the ends of the branches. You know that they're still there. You got to keep spraying. If you don't see any of that at all, you don't have any, so you don't have to worry about the fruit. But anytime you see they call that flagging of the new growth, where the end leaves just turn brown because something drilled the center of that stem out, then keep spraying with this every 2 weeks until you stop seeing that.
Okay.
Then you won't have any moths to get into that fruit.
So there's no issue with more applications than I really need, right? I mean,
Well, you have to follow the rules. So on here it says only 6 applications per season,
Okay.
which is
Yeah.
3 months. So
yeah.
that's every 2 weeks. I don't know why they don't say it. It's every 14 days. Here they say 6 times per season, which is the same thing.
Okay.
Is the maximum you can apply that.
All right.
So,
All right. Thank you.
What happens if you spray more than 6 times?
you're doing something against their law.
Okay. Okay. How do you get? I have an August Pride peach. First year got huge peaches, and then they're getting smaller and smaller. I thin them and everything. So what else can I do to make them bigger, and when?
Well, the way to make them bigger is to make sure that you encourage vigorous growth on your tree. Now, all this stuff shortens the life of peach trees, but you trim them so that any branch that's shorter than a foot, you just trim it real short, because you don't want that to produce fruit, because any branch that grew this year that's shorter than a foot can't make a big peach. It'll make small peaches, but not big ones. Anything that grew more than 2 feet, you don't want that either, because usually they don't have many flower buds on them if it grew that fast. So you cut those short too, and let them regrow and see what you get. But you keep the branches that grew right around 1 foot to 2 foot in length, because that's going to be your best quality fruit on those branches. And you make sure those branches are spaced out, fairly horizontal branches spaced out about 1 foot on each side of the trunk. So you can have 4 sets of branches or 6 sets of branches, 6 vertical sectors of your tree, if you like, so that you make sure the branches are well spaced. You can start doing that this time of year. In my house last year, we did it right after we took the peaches off. Then we cut the branches that had the peaches on them real short, and they had time to regrow during the summer before fall started. But most orchards wait till winter, when it's easier to see the branches, and do all the pruning at that time. Whatever branch fruited, they cut it short so it regrows the following year, and save the branches that are 1 to 2 foot of growth this year.
The August Pride is so aggressive. They're growing out, 5, 6 feet. I just took back a bunch of them, but
And
it's
if
just
you've
really
got
hard.
really vigorous growth like that, sometimes they say it's better just let the tree make 2 trunks or even 3 trunks, 3 uprights, because sometimes it's just too vigorous. You can't stop that growth from getting too long. So most orchards work with between 3 and 4 trunks that are going upright, and then all the other branches they want being horizontal for fruiting.
The fruit just quit 2 weeks ago. So, so I just started trimming, but it's really close to fall. Will it regrow before winter? Okay. So I waited too long.
Yeah, you can still trim off what you don't need for next year.
Okay.
But it's not going to regrow much as soon as we get to the first day of fall, which is only a week away, they just stop growing. So
don't take it back more right now.
well, you can eliminate branches you don't need,
Okay.
and then keep the branches that you want the fruit next year.
I have a young avocado I got from you, and I left it in the pot too long and got it in the ground last year, and it's doing real well. So it fried a little bit in this heat, but it's I don't know, it's standing 5-6 feet, and it's starting to turn over the top. How do I prune that as a young tree?
Any way you like. I mean, there's a lot of ways to trim avocados. A lot of orchards don't like a central trunk that'll let it branch along the ground. In theory, if you want heavy production on any fruit tree, you want the center trunk, and you want everything else to be horizontal branching. The horizontal branching fruits, this upright trunk doesn't. And then you clip it at the height you want, the highest you want it to be. You just clip it off, so it doesn't get higher than you want to shade the rest of that tree. But right now they're doing a lot of work with the spalling avocados. So if you can support your branches horizontally, they'll fruit year after year after year. If you don't support them, what usually happens with an avocado tree is it has a nice branch getting some good sunlight out here. It makes a flower and fruits, and then the branches just wade straight down, and the fruit forms hanging straight down. That branch never ever flowers or fruits again. So the tree has to spend energy making a new branch coming out to the sunlight, and then it'll flower, and then it'll hang and never fruit again. So if you want to avoid that cycle, they say if you support this branch, you can get that thing to fruit super heavily for years and years and years. They do that in Japan and South Africa. So now they're trying it here in Irvine at the field station. They're doing that research to see which avocados work real well. But we've seen what happens when you support a branch, and it's just crazy production on that thing.
So why does it quit producing when it's hanging down?
Because it dives into the darkness of the center of the tree.
Okay.
So it never sees the sunlight as well. So what's interesting is there's a tree over at the Great Park in Irvine. My wife and I were there about 10 years ago. We had donated that tree for them. Well, so the tree was like this, about 8 foot by 8 foot. There's one branch that was about a foot off the ground. So the fruit on that branch were touching the dirt. There was 50 avocados on that branch. We're just amazed when that branch has more fruit on that one branch than the entire rest of this tree. Why? And then the same year I was at a customer's house, they had a hass tree. They had one branch lying on their flagstone, absolutely covered in fruit. Well, the reason is because this branch can't hide from the sun. The fruit is the ground is supporting the fruit, so this branch is just horizontal. 50 fruit on one branch, that's just nuts. And if you do that to more branches on your tree, support them, and you might put stakes here and a wire and get branch support this way. You can probably support several tiers of branches and then have stakes in front and back do the same thing, get the branches supported, and see if you can get that kind of production on it. But that's just crazy. What we saw was just puzzling and crazy. But that's how they've always done it in Japan, because they're in hot houses because it's too cold there in the winter. But they have their trees in big buckets, supported at an angle slightly upwards, and they grow their branches around 12, 15 foot long. And they just do rows and rows and rows with just 2 branches on each tree, and you can just see the fruit in the photos, the fruit just hanging on those branches real heavily. So horizontal branching is, supported branching may be a real good thing to do on avocado trees. I mean, they're still determining it, but it certainly can work. I mean, that's how apple orchards, they've evolved all to be on, a lot of them be on fences, because apples are so heavy too, and pear orchards doing the same thing because the fruit's really heavy on them.
I'm going to try to keep mine short, but if it's turning over and I cut it at this height, it's not quite as tall as I want it yet.
No,
will it
stake
go
it.
up more?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you get some strength. What kind of avocado?
It's Fuerte.
Well, that thing wants to get 40 foot.
I know. It's what grows in my neighborhood. We have bumper crops right now in our neighborhood. I
Good.
don't know what happened this winter, but yeah.
Well, last year no one got much fruit set because it was so cold. So this year the trees are so full of energy that most avocados have real good fruit set this year.
Other than, well, supporting them and thinning them, that's the only way that people keep theirs from breaking, the branches. Okay.
Yeah.
No trick to it otherwise. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. What do you do about seedlings? When I plant seedlings, sometimes they come up and then they just stall forever, and then a few weeks later, they
Avocado
stop.
seedling?
No?
No?
Oh gosh, what was I growing? I don't know. It was just general. Yeah. What was I growing? I don't remember. A fruit. I mean, a vegetable.
I don't know.
No, I know what it was. The California poppy.
Huh.
But I've had this happen with all different seeds. But yeah.
Well, California poppies, certainly they need to be planted in the middle of a rainy season. If there's not enough moisture in the ground, they just don't grow well.
Yeah, we're trying to get them established in some of the natural front yards in our neighborhood. I throw the seed in, it never comes up. So I thought I'd try planting it. Yeah. These are supposed to be like weeds, right?
Well, yeah, they never seem to start well in containers.
Okay.
And they don't, the book says they don't transplant well. But in the ground, I've thrown out seeds in my yard and they don't come up when you're watering. They only come up after it rains, real heavily for a couple weeks in a row, because apparently they need that constant irrigation to leach out a chemical that's in the seed that prevents them from sprouting.
I thought it was something in the rain that made things take off. But
no, it's they said there's a chemical that's in the seed that you have to the rain has to leach out, and only a certain amount of rain, a lot of rain over a short period of time will leach out the chemical to allow them to sprout. So if you watered them, 2 or 3 times a day for 2 weeks, maybe they'll grow well. But otherwise, they just stay dormant.
Yeah.
The seed never dies. I mean, one of the interesting stories we saw a couple years ago was they said a place in Chile that hadn't rained for 4,000 years rained, and all the California, they have the same poppies. They all sprouted after 4,000 years in the sand. So, or 400 years, I think 400 years, no recorded rainfall in that coastal section, and then they got all these flowers coming up.
My daughter had some natives she just put in the ground, and they're probably in the wrong soil because she brought from the big box store. But they won't come back from the wilt.
Not usually, yeah.
Yeah, and so, okay, so, but they're not dying. And so she's asking me what to do with them.
I don't
Pull 'em,
know.
Or can you, I told her maybe take them out and kind of redo the roots, put them back
Yeah,
in
but they're
your
not
soil.
supposed to be good with transplanting, so I don't know if,
Yeah.
if they'll survive that.
Okay. Okay.
Another question on stone fruits. I just finished pruning all of my peach trees and plum trees. Is there anything that we can spray on to help prevent any of the bugs getting into the branches?
Well, they claim that plants seal their wounds really quickly, but there are some bugs that might drill it. I mean, the old days we put tar on it, but like on roses, for a long time we had a problem called a raspberry cane borer, that you cut a rose and then the top 3 or 4 inches got messed up because a borer went into that. And all we did was either put some nail polish on it, some Vaseline on it, anything that they couldn't recognize as the tissue of the plant, paint, tape, anything would help that. Now, there's not many things that go into stone fruits that bore in when you freshly cut one. And usually they say proper irrigation, good sap flow keeps any bug out. The one thing you do have to watch out for is any rainstorms. So if it rains within a few days of when you're doing pruning, then those things can get infected. And then a spray might be warranted at that point, or maybe good to do
Thank
a
you.
fungicide of some sort.
Are you going to be carrying citrus soon because of the, it was
That's up
lifted
to
for the quarantine?
CDFA. It's not up to us.
Well, they lifted the quarantine. I read in the paper. That's why I was wondering.
Well, it's lifted the quarantine on.
For the what's the one that's attacking the psyllid or whatever, the one that's attacking the orange trees?
Well, yeah, the psyllids are out of control, so they're no longer.
But what's the one that
um,
causes a greening disease?
Yeah, the psyllids.
So, okay.
And what they did too is they said they brought in the natural predator for the psyllids, which means now it's just going to be an established population, but in low numbers because they got the biological control out there. So they're not even trapping for it anymore because they said they can't find any around. But I'm not sure what they're going to do with the quarantine. So the quarantine, they said, for 2 years following a find of a diseased tree in a neighborhood, you can't sell or move citrus. I don't know how that's going to be affected.
They said you now could move it. So something, I don't know. It was in the register.
Yeah, we'll have to look it up and see.
Yeah. I just was wondering because that's what's holding you up from carrying your citrus, right?
Right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I would expect the CDFL will contact us. Otherwise, I'll look at the website and check it out.
If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. Okay.
So now we're going to go to all the questions that are being sent through the live chat. So these are questions that come in as Gary's doing the class from people that can watch the classes all over the country and the world. So I'm going to go in order of the way the questions were received. What is the best control for black fig fly for figs?
Officially, there's no controls that we know of besides covering the fruit itself with an organza or a real fine mesh bag. Now at the nursery, what we're doing, because one of the researchers at UC Riverside mentioned that they think that a control for olive fruit flies, which is a mixture of some kind of sugar and spinosad, for olive fruit flies will do the black fig fly also, because the adults are attracted to sweetness, and if they eat it with the spinosad, it'll kill the adult. Can't do anything about the larvae because the fly lays egg inside the fruit, so you can't spray anything in there. So at the nursery, we do spinosad every 2 weeks, and whenever we spray spinosad, we have molasses to it in case that'll help. So we do the proper spinosad, which on different products it'll say 2 ounces per gallon, 7 ounces per gallon, depends what product it is. And then we add 1 ounce of molasses per gallon along with that. We don't know if this is the right amount of molasses. We're just trying something. Now at our nursery, we haven't seen any evidence of fig fly the entire year. Just haven't seen it. So it may be anecdotal, just coincidence that we don't have any fig flies here, but and again, we don't have that many mature trees that are fruit bearing either. So we have a few though, and we haven't seen any evidence of the fig flies at all. So hopefully that combination is doing it for us, but we'll see. The product that's being sold commercially for olive fruit fly is being sold in orchard quantities, $250 for a gallon of it. So I don't want to put that on our shelf at that cost. I don't think anybody can afford that. And I can't make this recommendation officially because we don't have any evidence that it's actually will work, but that's what we're trying here.
And what about control for the birds on figs?
Well, birds are hard. If it was just a 2-week crop, you can cover your thing with the netting and that'll stop the birds, but figs fruit for half the year, so you can't leave netting on that long. Although if you build a tall enough structure so that your leaves don't get caught in the netting, it can work. We've been told that if you cover it with one of those empty clamshells you get from the supermarket that you get lettuce in, that'll stop any critter from eating the fruit. Now figs don't need bees, so you can cover entire branches with fine gauze or mesh, because the bees don't have to get in, and that'll stop them. Now, one of the first things I did 40 years ago, I had 20 fig trees, and it sounded like an aviary in my backyard. So I got a realistic looking snake, rubber snake this big, set it out on one of the fig trees, did not hear a bird for 2 weeks. So birds do not like snakes. It's got to be a big one. We have some scarecrow snakes that we sell that inflate, and they're pretty big, but again, fig season's so long that if it was peach tree, you put a snake in there, yeah, that might stop all the birds for the 2 or 3 weeks you're harvesting peaches. But figs, again, it's almost half a year that they're fruiting. So
Okay, next question. Are you planning on selling pistachio trees? If not, what seller would you recommend?
well, we can order pistachio trees. The problem being is they don't fruit here. They need inland heat. I mean, they said the best place to grow pistachios is probably Las Vegas or Phoenix. Fresno does fine. Sacramento does fine, but we're talking 80 degrees day and night for 3 or 4 months of the year. And we just don't see that kind of heat here. They said they'll grow here, although they can wake up really late because of their lack of chill. So we've carried them in the past. The problem is the price. When we get them from our supplier, plants this big would retail for about $200. Plus, you have to buy a male and a female, so that's $400. And you may never get any fruit if we don't have a hot summer. Like 2 years ago, that summer was hot enough we might have been able to get fruit. This year, there'd be no chance. We've had 1 week of heat. This summer is about it. That's the only time it really got much above 85 was for 1 week. They need to be around 100 degrees for an entire summer, which is Modesto, Fresno, that area. So that's our problem. We can get Chinese pistachios, which make little tiny nuts. I don't know if they're edible, very good to eat though. But the regular pistachio, there's reasons why there are no orchards around this area. So you can grow the tree, but it may not produce anything of any size.
And the same customer also asked, what is your best advice for gopher control? So far, I religiously use the baskets.
We've been told bubble gum kills them if they eat it. So if you can find an open hole, throw a piece of bubble gum down there and see if they'll eat it. They said if they eat it, they're dead. There's a lot of gopher traps, but fortunately, I've never had a gopher problem in any house. I had one gopher once, and I dug it out of the ground before it made a tunnel more than 6 foot long. So I just dug it out, but I haven't had to deal with them, so I'm not sure what the best way is.
I'm in the Sacramento area and I'm high ground on a wet winter and I get the gophers. So I've tried several products. I did find a trap that is very effective and fairly easy to use. So I trap it on an annual basis, and as soon as I see a mound coming into the yard, then I start deploying traps.
Usually do how many traps?
I only have 3 or 4 traps.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to set 2 at a time on each side of the run and monitor your traps. So it's been quite effective. I still have them come in some areas, but in my growing area, I don't have much of a problem anymore. But you have to keep after it. But I don't know if you want to know the specific vendor that I get them from.
Well, the famous one we used to carry in the old days was the Maccabee trap, but there's a lot of easier traps to set than that one.
So this is Trapline Products. They've changed the way they market them. It used to be mole traps or gopher traps, and I don't know about here, but in the Sacramento area, they tend to be smaller gophers. So I actually use the mole traps. They fit in the gopher run better. but very, very effective for controlling them as long as you keep an eye out for mounds.
All right. Good advice.
Okay, next question. Do I have to add sand if I have pumice, perlite, clay balls, and cocoa 6040 core for cannabis indoors?
No, I mean, indoor environments are not stressful. Sand helps hold more moisture. It's kind of just another way to hold water compared to the other materials that you had mentioned. But an indoor situation, it sounds like you've got everything you need.
And one more question from the same customer about indoor potting soil. I wonder if if you just purchased indoor potting soil, would you use it at the top of top pot as a light blocking or top feeding? I guess like a commercially made indoor potting soil.
I probably wouldn't even touch that stuff because it is mostly compost. And anytime you bring compost inside a house, you start getting all these bugs living in it. So I'd rather not. I like to use a lot of pumice rock though. So to our top pot, which is peat, moss, pumice, perlite, sand, and charcoal, add more of the pumice rock to it. Maybe double up on the pumice, make it half pumice and half that, and then you get some really good results inside.
What's the purpose of the charcoal?
Hold minerals, so it stores fertilizer, makes fertilizer work better. Let's put it that way. Plus, it's inert, so it's another soil particle that doesn't decompose. So,
Just an off the shoot question about what you were saying about the California poppies not growing. I wonder where in some years when you drive on the hillsides, they're everywhere. And then some years you hardly hear about them, even after a rainy winter. Just an observation that I've seen. Like that one year, the California poppies were just everywhere. And then after a decently rainy winter, we didn't see much at all this year.
yeah, sometimes it rains enough to get them sprouted, and then it just dries up and they can't bloom. So that can happen. You need an extended winter to get a good bloom on them. So
it's not necessarily just the rain; it's what happens after the rain too.
right.
Does Gary's top pot contain agricultural lime?
No, I mean, we're in an area that doesn't get much rainfall. So in areas you get a lot of rainfall east of the Rockies, say, you need to add lime to things to keep the soil from getting too acidic, because that happens where we have a lot of rain. Everything gets too acidic. Here we're too alkaline. Our tap water is alkaline, so we don't bother to add it to ours. I don't believe our supplier adds anything to our soil either. So yeah. But if you're on the East Coast, yeah, you'd probably want to add, or any heavy rainfall area, you'd want to add some lime.
What can I do to force my Smith orange tree to bloom?
Well, if it's in good shape now, Smith's red, I believe it's Smith's red orange that you probably have, which is a fairly new cultivar. And a lot of times the new cultivars take longer to start production. The genetic age of the cultivar has a lot to do with how soon it produces. On a Morel blood orange or tropical blood orange in my own house, at my own home, we had it once for 5 years and it didn't make a fruit. And it was getting like 10 by 10 and still not fruiting. So we did do the spray with the sugar on it. So so you overload the tree with carbohydrate storage in the fall. So this time of year you start spraying it. The main ingredient is molasses, but molasses, seaweed, and fish was the original formula in the California Rare Food Growers Manual. So in 1 gallon of water, of course you don't have to make a whole gallon, you can do this by quarts, but 1 gallon of water you add 1 ounce of each of the following some form of sugar, some molasses, fish, which would be the fertilizer, and seaweed extract, which is a growth, I don't know, it's a powerful growth hormone. But that combination they used on some orange trees or citrus trees in Palos Verdes, where they said so cloudy they couldn't get the energy to flower. And they sprayed this on there every 2 weeks in the fall and got bloom the next year. So it's like getting extra energy into it. So that's one thing you can try. I did it on my own Tarokal blood orange and got it to fruit 200 fruit for its first crop. We didn't spray it the next year, but after a big crop like that, you're probably not gonna get much fruit. It's only made like 5 the next year, but it seems to work. When you spray sugar of some sort on the foliage in the fall months, it's like getting an extra 5 hours of sunlight per day, and then that energy storage in the plant can make it then get over the barrier and flower and fruit the next year.
So you're spraying that, not drenching it.
You spray it on the leaves.
Oh, I was drenching my plants.
Yeah, they found out, we read an article saying they were surprised, the researchers were surprised that they thought the sugar would be going to the little stomata holes. They said it goes right through the waxy surface of the leaves. They absorb it right through the entire leaf absorbs sugar, which is interesting that they can do that. They're set up to do that because they make the sugar in their chloroplasts from photosynthesis, but they can absorb sugar from the outside.
So putting it in the ground wouldn't do anything for it.
Well, putting sugar in the ground tends to wake up the nitrifying bacteria, so you get greener plants due to the soil bacteria making nitrogen fertilizer.
Okay, next question. We live in Oklahoma and grow everything on raised beds. The lawn keeps cracking and some sections sink down a few inches. What can we do to help this clay soil from cracking?
That's just a water issue, because clay is expansive when it's wet, and so you just water real frequently, water daily. That's pretty much what all sports fields do. They water them every day.
Does a wetting agent ever help with that?
Probably would. There's something out there called Easy Wet that you spray it on for 3 months. It helps the ground absorb water better, but you just don't let the soil dry out. Just keep it wet.
Okay, what is the maximum height for avocado trees in both 5 and 15-gallon containers if you want them to stay in those size pots for another year or two?
Depends how much you water. So the main problem with containers is the water storage is not real good. I mean, a 5-gallon bucket may only hold a quart of water. About 4 foot is about it. And in a 15-gallon, maybe 6 foot. But they will get root bound in a 5 real fast, so I wouldn't leave it in the 5-gallon a year. 15-gallon be better.
Pest control suggestion for ants on flesh of young dragon fruit.
Well, when you have ants, they always cause trouble. So the best product we can sell you is one of the Amdro products. It's a bait. It's not organic. It's a bait you put around the property, and the ants pick it up, and it kills the entire colony. It works quite well at times. I just did that at an orchard and 3 days ago, and just didn't see a single ant in that section of the orchard last night. I was pretty amazed. I thought it wasn't going to work that well, but it cleaned out the ants in a part of an orchard. So get rid of the ants so that they don't cause trouble, because all ants do is farm sucking bugs. So,
What is the recommended medium for cymbidiums?
well, cymbidiums are terrestrial orchids. They can actually live in loose soil. Bark, fine and ground up bark is one thing. They'll live in our top pot. that live in our acid mix. Some people we met from Hawaii said, well, we don't have any trees with good bark here. We just put them in volcanic rock, straight pumice. That's fine too. There's no set thing. I mean, again, they live in the ground. So anything that retains moisture around them will work. Don't use compost. The compost rots them out.
Can scoria rock, which is the red, black, foamy volcanic material, be used instead of pumice?
Yeah, I don't know if it's much of a weight advantage. I don't know that rock material too well. I know they use it a lot in some of our nurseries from the Bay Area, use the red volcanic rock, but I don't know how much it weighs versus the white volcanic. Our white volcanic rock, our pumice that we use, probably weighs about 40 pounds per cubic foot. And I don't know what the red scoria would weigh per cubic foot if it's helping out with the weight.
Okay, is the foliar sugar spray a valid way of boosting dragon fruit plants in the fall?
I don't know how well dragon fruits will absorb sugar. If they do, it certainly would help. We'll have to experiment with that one and see. Just spray one branch on one and not the other parts of the plant, see if it helps. I have no idea if cactus can absorb sugar through their, because they got a really thick waxy layer.
We're almost caught up on all these. This is the last question from the live feed so far. How would you rehab a very well-established tree, 25 years old, peaches, pears, and apples?
Is that one tree?
I think they're different trees. I think they're asking, how would you rehab? I have one peach, a pear, and apple, and it's over 25 years old.
Yeah, pears and apples handle pruning wounds really well, so you can just cut them severely, to maybe 3 or 4 feet, and redevelop the trunk and some wood. Although if you make them too small, then they may not be able to keep the roots alive, and it'll shorten their life that way. Peach trees, once they're past 12 years of age, they're going downhill. So I wouldn't try to resurrect the peach. I would just replace the dirt, or put them in a different part of the yard. But apples and pears, both should be able to live a long time. So I know apple orchards, they said you can keep pruning them for 150 years, they're still in good shape. But yeah, you do have to have new branches once in a while to fruit better.
Is Amdro cat safe?
Probably. I don't think cats are stupid enough to eat it. We have a dozen cats here. We use it all the time. I've never seen them even smelling this stuff. It does smell a little bit like corn, but generally I would say cats are smart. Dogs are kind of dumb. Now, we had a dog owner call up this company and asked him how much it would take to kill his dog. I'm not sure how much his dog weighed. It might have been a 30-pound dog. He told me that you'd have to eat 2 pounds of poison, 2 pounds of this to kill his dog. So he wasn't too worried, because you just broadcast it over your yard. The dirt would probably kill the dog before the chemical did. So yeah, it's not organic, but it's fairly safe. They use it a lot, parks, playgrounds, because it's a lot safer than fire ants.
What do you use for ants around citrus trees then?
That's what we use.
It's not organic.
Yeah, I mean, you're not, the rule in most orchards is, if it's not an organic orchard, is if a fruit doesn't hit the ground, you can sell it. But once it hits the ground, you got pesticides on the ground, then yeah, you're not supposed to sell it.
Okay, questions from the email that Gary received last night. I guess this customer bought a lemon guava from Armstrong, rinsed off the root ball, transplanted into a 15-gallon bucket with the top pot, watered very well and maintained consistent irrigation. A week or two later, wilting and some yellowing of leaves, leaf tips, edgings appearing burnt. And then bought a replacement one, repeated the prior steps, and same thing is happening. Any ideas?
Well, guavas aren't usually affected that much by compost, so I would just leave it alone and grow it in our top pot and don't take off so much dirt. I haven't really worked with guavas much to see. Now, I've worked with tropical guavas and successfully changed the soil on them many times. I've not worked with the lemon guava, though, that species, to see how sensitive they are to fixing the soil around the roots. But apparently they're more sensitive. Now, usually when we do any of that root stuff, you can cut half the foliage off, and that'll help a lot too. Cut off all the new growth. The new growth is more sensitive to transplant shock than the older leaves are. But I haven't done the lemon guavas enough to tell you what's going on.
What are your thoughts on feeding plants with compost tea?
Doesn't make any sense at all. Compost tea, unless you constantly aerate it, the moment that, if you don't constantly aerate it before you put it on, this is water with no oxygen in it at all, and you put that around the roots of your plants, you can start root rot if there's no oxygen in that water. So I do not like compost tea at all for that fact. I don't know that it's got much nutrition in it. I don't know the whole concept. I mean, it was a big deal 20 years ago. We actually sold compost tea because they told us all these things that it can do. And after a few months of testing with it, it did none of those things that they told us it can do, like stop diseases on roses. And I don't know. It seems to be kind of a scam nowadays.
Another question about the Amdro. There are multiple Amdro ant bait granule products in black plastic containers. Which one does Gary recommend?
I don't know. Sometimes from our supplier we can only get this one. I think all of them have the same stuff in it. It's just a matter of the label showing, black, and they make a container that's white. I don't know if there's any difference at all. Looks like it's the same chemical in it. Inside looks the same. So I'm not sure. They just have different packages. I know some companies make a special black package. I don't know if they think it sells better if it's black. I don't know.
Resolution is too poor. Show us the bottle up close.
So that's the Amdro black bottle, and they make a white bottle with red labeling, and they make, and I couldn't determine if there's any differences except for minor things with what the label says.
What's the active ingredient in it?
I can't read that. When it's in red and it's on a black label and it's that tiny. Need a magnifier.
I was going to say, take a picture with your phone.
Hydromethylnon, which is the same thing that they've been using.
So just look for that in any of the Amdros.
So there's a product out there called Extinguish, which I've been trying to find, which is supposed to have two ways of killing the ants. It's supposed to have a growth regulator and a queen sterilant. But I haven't been able to find that one. They said that one might be better than this one. And generally, there are different chemicals available. I know Orange County Farm Supply has different products that might have different chemicals. So with any single chemical, sometimes you'll get a population of ants that's immune to it. So
Works great on fire ants.
I've heard that you should never take off more than 30% of a plant at a time. Is this true? And if so, and you need to cut it back 50% of its size, should this be done in two separate sessions a few months apart?
Well, the old practice in orchards was to stump the trees and let them regrow, and that's like 90% of the tree is gone, and the trees responded just fine. I think the danger is if you remove too much of the tree, the roots are starving because the foliage feeds the roots. So if the roots don't get any food for a long time, you lose your root system, then you can lose the whole plant. But the standard practice in orchards was just to stump the trees when they got too big, and I've done that, and the tree responded quite well. So I don't, the rules they make up because it sounds good, 30%, so you don't starve your roots of the energy that the leaves were providing. But I don't know, the difference between 35, 30%, 20%, 100%. I don't know if there's a cutoff point where it's real critical or not, because we've done 100% at times, just stumping the trees. So
Okay.
I've done that with crepe myrtle trees too. I stumped one, and boy, did it look gorgeous 6 months later. Absolutely gorgeous after stumping it. And that's how a lot of hedges are revived. You just stump them, and they come back with fresh branches that are fuller. So I don't know. Some plants may be sensitive. I mean, there's certain plants we know that if you get rid of, like most pine trees, if you cut off all the needles, branches with needles on them, you've just killed the pine tree. It can't resprout from bare wood. Same with a lot of the plants in the Protea family and a number of plants in the myrtle family. You can't cut them past the last leaf that's on the branch. But I don't know all the plants that this kind of is affected by, because most plants will resprout from a stump, but not everything.
So it's just before 11, so we're going to probably go another 5 minutes.
Sure. More written questions?
There's still a few more that are coming in
Okay.
as we go. Following up on the pruning question, would molasses in water mixture be a good measure against die-off from pruning?
I don't think the molasses will get into the pruning areas quick enough to help them from dying back. Usually when you prune something, that plant's going to retreat immediately to the point where it thinks it's got enough energy to stop the dieback. So I don't know if you did molasses a week or two before, yeah, that can probably help. Just get more energy reserves into the wood. I'd like to do the questions because those people sent those questions in early.
So we'll stop the chat feed questions, and there's a few more online questions or email questions that are left. Do you have any advice on growing starfruit?
Whenever I've been successful with starfruit, I had them underneath the edge of a building. Now, a friend of mine grows starfruit out in the open, but he's at the top of a hill and he's next to a fence, so there's some protection against dry air there, because when we've grown it out in the middle of our yards, usually the thing just dries up. But this was my last experience myself with starfruit was 30 years ago, before we knew a lot about dirt, so it may not have been a healthy plant to begin with. But whenever I've grown starfruit on the southeast, southwest side of a building, underneath the eaves, it's always done well and fruited very well. And these were the days when we actually got frost, so anything sticking more than a few inches beyond the eave of my house would freeze off in the winter. But underneath the eave, it was totally protected, and they fruited really well. South side, east, anything to do with southeast, southwest sides. We did it on the southeast side of one building, southwest side of my house, one-story house, so the eaves are close. They did really well in those locations. So,
Next question. Passion fruit vine looking great. It flowered in June and July, but all the flowers fell. I tried hand pollinating, but still not producing fruit. Any tips?
no, I think it's just because we're behind in the weather this year, because our passion vine here, which is really old, no fruit. I have a passion fruit at my house that's 5 years old, no fruit. It's blooming, but it hasn't had enough time this year to gain energy because, again, the coldest day this year was April 5th. And so we're just, 5 months past winter now. What is it? April, May, June, July, August, September. Yeah, we're 5 months past the coldest day of winter. So I think the plants are just behind. Like this lady was saying, her August fried peaches is ripened, finished ripening, or that's at least a month behind. So we're just behind on everything. So the passion fruit, I just say give it a few more weeks. This heat spell we just had should have given enough energy so that the subsequent blooms should be strong enough to flower and fruit now. But
I have one totally ignored it, and not even water, and it's just covered with fruit.
how long ago since it's been
It's
fruit?
still fruit. It's just falling off now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So yours has been fruiting for at least
So
a
what
month.
did you do with them?
Bring him here.
Yeah.
We have about 3 more questions to go. I live in coastal South Texas. I planted a grafted fantastic avocado tree 2 years ago and finally got fruit this season. However, most of the fruit had black mold on the outside near the stem. And as I let it ripen on the counter, the black mold spread over most of the fruit. Some ripened well while others ripened unevenly. Any tips?
Well, we haven't dealt with that problem at all. University of Florida talks about anthracnose messing up the fruit and avocados, but we don't, since we haven't done anything with it here, I don't know really how to treat it. Now for anthracnose on mangoes and on several fruit trees, they use garden floss. So it may work on avocados too, but on this label, it doesn't talk about avocado anthracnose. They do talk about avocado root rot that's helping. And it does talk about mango anthracnose and this helping, but I don't know. You can experiment with it and see if it works, but I don't have an official recommendation because we just don't deal with that in this area.
Okay, we're almost there. You teach that frequent light watering is better than infrequent deep watering. Does this apply to potted plants? I frequently read and hear that containerized fruit trees should be watered until it comes out of the bottom of the pot. If watered daily in top pot, is it sufficient to water lightly, say just the top half or quarter of the pot?
Well, the main thing that when they say watering daily, light frequent watering, all we're doing is keeping, quote, the tank of water in the soil full. It's just like going to the gas station every mile. You just want to keep your tank full so that it never runs dry. Now, container plants always run dry unless you water them 2 or 3 times a day. They're running dry, so you've got to water them deeply because it doesn't hold much water. But in the ground, yeah, all the theme now is keep the soil moist. The top foot of soil has got to remain moist. If the plants think they're running dry, then they start aborting their crop, or the crop splits, or the crop doesn't reach maximum size. So all the farms are now going toward daily irrigation or multiple times per day because the crops turn out better. So in potted plants, that means you can set your container, if it's in our top pot, or proper soil, in a sauce of water to maintain that moisture the entire day, or else I used to have on my own pots, my drip system going 3 times a day just to keep it moist the entire day so it never dries out. Because pots tend to be famous for that. Totally dry by the end of the day, then you water to get it wet again, then they're totally dry again. They go through that cycle. So a lot of times the fruit in a container never gets to full size because it's too dry. So.
Okay, last question, all the way from India. As a fellow gardening enthusiast in Mumbai, India, hopefully I said that right, I'm eager to replicate your mix. We have 3 months of rain, monsoonal season, and high of 95 in summers and about 60 in winters. I'm having problems sourcing pumice stone. It's either very scarce or expensive in our market. I identified an abundant local resource as rice hulls. Is it okay to mix rice hulls, peat moss, perlite, sand, and carbon?
Say them.
Her mix would be 20 to 25% rice hulls, then peat moss at about 30%, perlite at about 20 to 30, sand and carbon.
Sounds fine. So rice hulls are essentially equivalent to perlite. They don't decompose. The only thing bad about rice hulls is they're kind of soft, so your plants may wobble a bit because of they're not firm like pumices. Even perlites can be a little soft too. But rice hulls are good. They don't decompose, so that's fine. That sounds pretty. I like a good mix.
Want to do one more?
Sure.
For Sacramento, so you may chime in on this. She lived in Sacramento, and 4 out of my 10 peach trees had white on their skin. Was that mildew?
Don't know what that is. Huh. I haven't had that happen on a peach in all the years I've been growing peaches. Huh.
Maybe you could send a picture of that and we could look at that.
Yeah, a photo would help.
And last question, if watering pots daily like you do at your store, should fertilization be increased?
Well, that's the one disadvantage of watering a lot is, yeah, you wash out all your fertilizers. So we happen to use, that's why we use Osmocote, because this is a time release. So it lasts us, if it says here, containers last 6 months. So we're washing a little bit of it. I mean, they did studies on Osmocote because the EPA wanted to point the finger at nurseries to blame them for all the fertilizer in the riverbeds. And so they did a nursery that was using Osmocote. They said, Osmocote's great. It wasn't getting into the rivers nearby. They said only about, what'd they say, 8% of it was leaving the container. But they thought that was, or less than that, I think. And they said they were amazed that it wasn't causing pollution of the rivers nearby, so they couldn't. And they pointed out this one. They were thinking this was to blame, but it's not. So
What were they finding?
well, you still get, most nurseries, you get a lot of fertilizer runoff if you use water soluble fertilizers or even some organic fertilizers. It just flushes through.
Like an injection system?
Yeah. So a lot of the nurseries had to make sure that the fertilizers didn't get in. I remember El Medino Nursery would line their drainage ditches with plants that will absorb the excess nitrogen coming out of the runoff. So and so they said, yeah, the channel was long enough and they had enough plants in there that by the time we got to the end, they couldn't find much in the way of nutrition the water left. So that's how they worked with it. So, okay.